Managing ERP implementations during a time of recession and economic uncertainty is one of the biggest challenges companies are facing right now. And to help us get some ideas on how to better handle that process and navigate that process, we thought we'd invite John Gibson here for a conversation to talk about some of his experiences in the last recession and some of the things he's doing with dealing with his operations and his business during the current situation we're in. I'm here with John Gibson. He's the CEO of Colorado Yurt Company. John, thanks for being here today.
Hey, Eric. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. And so, John, you and I go way back. We've worked together in your previous venture. We helped you, your previous company, through its software selection and ERP implementation right around the time of the last financial and economic crisis in 2008. But before we dive into that and some of the questions we have there, I want you maybe talk a little bit about your background. Just introduce us to yourself.
Sounds great. Well, thanks for inviting me today. A little bit of our background for me personally. I was running a lawn and tree care business that at the end, it was a 70-year-old business before we sold it off. But we'd gone through a whole bunch of different processes for our software internally, and then developed software and then selected an ERP package. And in that business, we had about 45,000 customers in 3 states, and we were serving 12 to 1,500 properties a day through the processes that we developed. I was fortunate enough to become the president of that company in the fall of 2008. My swan song to get there was the ERP selection process, and that's what helped me get to the seat that I got to. In the last 3 months here, I've actually purchased another business, Colorado Yurt Company, based out of Montrose, Colorado, and we manufacture yurts, teepees, and tents. And while our tagline is to get out in one, we're obviously recognizing now we were encouraging social distancing before it was cool.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it and see the silver lining in the current.
Yes.
Well, good. Well, appreciate you being here today. And you mentioned the previous company that you worked at, Swingle and Save-A-Tree. Swingle was acquired by Save-A-Tree, obviously, as you know. But one of the things I want to talk about before we get to your current situation, what you're doing to navigate the current environment, is maybe take us back to 2008 when we were first, or 2007 actually, when we were first working with you while you were COO at that company at Swingle. And maybe just tell us a little bit about that project and why you were going through that project, and then we'll get into kind of what you did after the recession and how you adjusted things from that point forward.
Yeah, when we started engaging, I think with you at that time, the key for us was our strategic plan was a large growth path. And one of the things we identified was that we just didn't have the background systems to help us through that growth. And well before the recession, we had made the decision to get off a homegrown software package that we had built and go out and buy a package that somebody else could help manage and help us develop. Through that process, we realized, one, we weren't software development people. We really shouldn't have been in that business, and we were. The other piece to it is we realized we probably weren't good at selecting a vendor or even understanding the process to buy one. And so a big step for us to start was to really identify that we needed somebody to help us. And at that time, we were fortunate enough to find Eric and yourself and your team. And I would say that we maybe weren't as conscious before as we are now that we were looking for a company that was agnostic in their selection process. And we started down a path of with some industry software and other software, and we realized if we asked them what we needed, they were going to tell us what they had, and they were going to sell us that. And so it was great to actually, make a decision to work with somebody who's going to teach us about all the different types of software and the whole process to get through it, identifying what our scope was, and then putting a defined, step-by-step task process together to make the best selection for the right reasons for the business.
Right. So we work together, during this time. We help you guys select the software. You implement it based on a certain set of needs that we had worked with you to define at that time. Then fast forward a few months, then you become CEO, 2008. and then 2008 recession hits. So when you look at, what happened during that time, you just in some ways laid out, we'd worked together to lay out, what is that future state process going to look like and what technology would best help you get there. And then we work together to implement that technology. But then what changed after that? I mean, what did you find as you went through the recession during that time, and what kind of strain, if any, did it put on the way the software was implemented, or changes you needed to make to the software and the operations the way you laid them out at the time?
Yeah, it's interesting. If I think of the timeline, we went live in about September of '07, I think it was, sometime in September, in summer or fall of '07, and the recession was, just on its way to starting. We didn't realize it. We were at the height of everything, and we were sloppy. We were sloppy in a lot of our business processes, and as the recession started coming closer, one thing I can look back on now and really realize is we never really finished the project because we were doing so well and things were fine. And I look back and we realized very quickly as the recession was starting, man, there's things we didn't do with the end of the project we should have done. If I look back to us working together, I remember a very definitive meeting where I was trying to get out of away from, I don't need you anymore, Eric, we got this. And now I look back, and at that time I look back and realize very quickly that was a bad thing. We should have completed the whole project when we were in it and had everybody engaged, and we would have had a much tighter process and likely not had as many missteps as we started into the recession.
Right. Yeah. So when you look at let's look at the operations first, the business processes and operations, and some of the things you didn't finish, or some of the things that you ended up having to either go back and finish or just change because of the recession. When you look at your operations and business processes, what was it you ended up having to change or do differently as a result of the recession at that time?
I think a lot of it was accountability to what we designed it to do that we weren't necessarily fully doing. Using the power of the package that we had purchased, really, even as I'll give one example of streamlining the AR processes. So much of it was a manual process before we had a system. Now we had the system, and we weren't using it to its full ability. We weren't requiring certain terms by a customer. We weren't actually defining the communication points along the way to getting them their bill and then following up with them on their bills. And that if we had, we quickly did that, and it made a big difference in making sure we didn't have lost cash. So that's probably the easiest answer I have for, wow, simple process, didn't finish it, had to finish it right in the middle of the recession.
Right. Yeah, and I imagine AR is probably one of those areas that in today's day and age is probably going to become another hot topic or hot commodity as companies hold on to cash and try to stretch out payment terms and whatnot.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
What about from the organizational side of things, the people side of things? What was it you found during that transition time or the time of turbulence in 08, 09? What did you have to do differently from a people and organizational perspective?
I think the first thing you think about is retracting and realizing, we were building for growth in 07, and then instantly in 08 and 09, we were going the other direction, and starting to look at your business model of what are really key positions versus and critical to operations and running your business, and compared to ones that were nice to have. And also inside of that were your staff. We were in a position where it was hard to find people at the, going into the recession because the unemployment was so low. All of a sudden we got into the recession and we realized, wow, if we went through a process of force ranking our team and actually, we used a 10 question scoring system for each individual, and then forced ranked from the top score to the bottom score of every employee we had on staff, no matter the division. It really helped us look at, wow, do these people align with our values or not? Are they really valuable people? And we separated into an A list, a B list, and a C list, and the C list meant cut. And what I realized was how many people were on the cut list that shouldn't have been there in the first place. And during that time frame of the recession, we were actually able to even start rehiring higher quality talent, and we leveraged that to get better people on our team that were more aligned with us than prior to the recessions. There was kind of a silver lining to getting the right people, and our most productive time became that 09, 2010, 2011 area, because we had the best employees that were most focused on who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and one that I certainly hadn't thought of, and I imagine a lot of companies aren't thinking about right now. Is, everyone's worried about health and their employees right now, but you look at the kind of the looking further out. How can we use this as an opportunity to make sure we've got the right team in place, and really just realign or reset in some ways who we are and what the team needs to look like. So that's a really really good point.
Yeah, yeah.
What about, so with the benefit of hindsight, you look back on those days now, and everything you know now with another decade of experience, plus having lived through that recession and those tough times, and now you're reliving it again, and we'll get to that here in a second. But when you look back on those days, is there anything you would have done differently during the ERP project itself, either during the selection or the implementation, or both?
If I think about the ERP selection, fully committing to the whole process would have been something I again, for the whole thing, I wish we had done more directly. It's hard to spend money when you're in it because it all feels like cost. And looking back on it, the investment would have saved us so much had we have gone just a little bit further down the road with it. And I think when we're looking at today, and we'll talk about my current situation here in a bit, but the lack of an ERP system itself is just tremendously ineffective. And when you're in a place where unemployment is really low, having to have staff doing things that could be done through a process is way more efficient and a lot easier to keep running. The machine's there every day. The people not necessarily let them focus on things that have to be people related, but let the machine do the task for you. So
Yeah, yeah, it's great points. And speaking of where you are today and the business you have today, let's fast forward now to where you are now, and it's pretty interesting. Just as a side note, see you become CEO of your last company right before the financial meltdown in '08, and then you buy this new company in early 2020, right before this happened. So it seems like you must be anticipating a big challenge. You want to take it on. Is what
yeah,
I'm saying.
apparently I have a skill for this. So it is it's a blessing all at the same time, and I really see it that way, as challenging as the last couple of weeks have been. And we sell yurts, teepees, and tents, and you would say, wow, that's going to be really hard hit when there's not a lot of people around that can purchase or want to purchase things. But this is my office that we're sitting in right now, and there's so many uses for our structures. And at this point, I see an opportunity for what people are going to want to do to get away from the city and the congestion that we've grown up around or enjoyed. I think the other thing that I see from an opportunity is in a new business, since I've been through this before, we don't have an ERP system here, and it's on our list of, I've been the owner for 3 months. I've looked at what our opportunities might be, and one of our biggest issues is our system behind what we do. And ERP is on the top of my list, but I'll get to that. I got to get to some other things first. And right now, boy, if I had that project done, I'd be in a totally different place. I don't have the data I need. I don't have the accuracy of timing. I don't have processes for AR. It's all done in Excel spreadsheets that we're hunting down. And our business runs well, but wow, we could be so much more efficient and quick with the data if I had it at my fingertips.
Right. So based on where you guys are today, then what is it you're doing to navigate the current situation from a organizational and operational perspective?
Well, so I think, we started planning 3-4 weeks ago about what impact it could have on our business and the virus. And I went back and pulled out, hey, what did I do in 2008 and responding to the recession? One of the first things we came up with was some defining objectives and trying to make sure that we had our leadership team aligned around those defining objectives. For us, they were, number one, we got to protect the company and the survivability of the company. Number two, we want to protect the top team members on our team, and back to the ABC rankings. Hey, I want to keep those people. Number three was to reduce the earnings loss to the majority of as many of those top team members as possible. And number four, position us for growth in the future. And don't look at this just as a bad thing. Hey, there's things to be learned and earned during this time frame. When I look back at those four, one thing I realized right off the bat was, as we keep working, is I missed the employee part because the recession wasn't about employee health and safety, and this one is. And so we've added that in, is that, hey, whatever we do, we want to make sure that we respect and have to, provide some employee safety at a level we hadn't before. So what are we doing right now? We actually were able to start to pivot to how might we help. I happen to have a daughter who's a pediatric ICU nurse, and one of the calls I had with her last week was, hey, Dad, we're being told we're not going to have enough safety equipment. And we started looking at our resources and thinking, what can we do with what we have to help? And so rather than making yurts and teepees and tents, we've pivoted to we're making safety shields for medical and other folks that might have face-to-face contact. It's the same product that we make windows out of. We're able to make sheets of separators and curtains for people to separate workspaces and or customer interactions. The window glass that we use, the vinyl that we use, it can be used in those separators to make a separation between two people that have to have a conversation for one way or another. And we're also reaching out to people that need sewing done. People can cut gowns and have fabric, but don't have a way to stitch it. And we might be able to do that for them. So, finding ways for us to be part of the solution and, telling our customers that I'm putting off all their other orders because we have a social responsibility to step up and do what we can with the equipment we have.
Right. And I guess in some ways, even though it's putting some strain on you by not having an ERP system, I suppose the good news is now you're evolving to this new business model, and it may permanently change to some degree your business model and your operations. The good news is you can, at least when you do decide to move forward with an ERP implementation, at least it's reflective of that current reality and future rather than the days of past, I suppose.
I think one of the things that I learned through the last process, and part of it was the guidance of you and your team at the time, was I'm taking notes on what our needs are going to be when we get to this new system and what we're going to be looking for. It was a great process to learn in just business. And, I look back to the selection process, the needs analysis, the scoping of what we were doing, the training, the change management, all of those things that we learned in the process are actually just core business skills that help us in everything we do. So again, back to, I looked at it as a cost, and today I can look back and go, it was a great investment in my education and our team's education on how to run our business better.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So what would you do? So if you were one of these CIOs, CFOs, CEOs, whatever role they might be in, that is either in the middle of an ERP implementation or transformation of some sort, or was thinking about it, or maybe they've just finished one up, whatever the case may be, what advice would you give to companies and leaders within those companies to deal with the current situation, as well as any lasting effect from today's situation?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would step back and go, hey, it might be worse than you think it is, and stretch yourself to think about what the worst case is, because it's probably not that bad, but somewhere in between there and here is where you're going to end up. And if you know what all the worst case options are, you have a lot better time to understand how you're going to make the decisions. And I think on one side is the worst case. On the other side is, how can you leverage what's happening? We're finding I can leverage this for employee hiring. I can do it from a process standpoint. We have no choice but to be more efficient, and that happens throughout the business in every area, whether it's related to our ERP or operations or sales or our collections process. First thing that rung to me right now is, hey, let me see my AR list and who owes me money and how likely am I to get paid on this work that I'm getting through my manufacturing facility. Because if it's not going to get paid for, I'm not going to do it. And those instant decisions that if I had the data at my fingertips, I'd be so much more efficient. I think the other thing I would say is use the intensity of this because it brings focus and purpose to what you're doing. It's not business as usual, and people respond to that. They tend to climb up to respond when the intensity gets pretty direct.
Yeah, that's a great point. A great place to leave it, I think, because it's easy to get lost in those two extremes of, what's the worst it could be, and then what are the upsides or the silver linings of using the intensity and getting people focused and getting back to basics in some ways, and pivoting where you need to, and cutting the fat and all that stuff, refocusing. I think that's a good closing message for the audience here.
I think one piece I'll add to the end of the story, which I hope to recreate, is our business at the end of 2009, at really kind of the end of and the beginning of the next recovery, compared to where we were 10 years later, 9 years later when we sold it, we were more than twice the size we were when we sold it from where we were at the time that the recession ended. There's a lot of opportunity ahead. You just got to find a way to leverage it.
Yeah, it's great point. Yeah, it's may feel like we're kind of hovering at the bottom now, but there's up to go from there. There's only upward to go from there.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, thanks a lot, John. Really appreciate you being here today. I appreciate your words of wisdom. You're somewhat of a black swan in some ways, because you're going through this for the second time, and a lot of companies and leaders are going through this for the first time. So it's a lot different, of course, in today's day and age, but it's this second big rough patch I know you've been through. So really appreciate you sharing your advice here today.
Yeah, thank you very much, and look forward to calling you soon.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, John, and hope the audience enjoyed this video, and hope you all have a great day.